Oh,
Here's
Lord.
my question. I have been dying to ask both Valiant Pro and everyone here. I originally gave Disney till they change 3 years. Are y'all shortening it or giving it longer time for their movies, for their studio? Because it seems like it's just one failure after another now. Element, Lightyear,
So
the Marvel.
you mean from a box office financial performance perspective, or from a content perspective?
I'm talking about till the box office forces them to change the content.
Oh, they're there now.
But they're not changing.
Well, okay. So you're right in that sense. And as we continue to remind folks, and George, I think that's a great time to bring up, to kind of remind some of the new viewers that we have. When Hollywood has to, any Hollywood production of that scale, you're talking about a gestational period of 2 to 3 years. Yeah. So depending on the scale of the movie, I mean, you're talking about a Star Wars movie or a Marvel film, you're talking like 3 years easy. So when they start planning things out, like the stuff we're seeing released in theaters today from Disney, with Marvel, for example, this was in the hopper and green-lit, like approved with a $250 million budget.
Pre-coof?
3 years ago.
Okay.
2 to 3 years ago at this point.
Probably actually when these entered into the stage where they were looked at and approved, probably 2019 is when these were nascent.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's my follow-up question then.
25, 26, easy at this point to see any kind of shift.
Okay.
What Bob Iger's talking about on an earnings call like this past Wednesday that we covered with that massive audience, like the stuff where he says, we have to cut back the amount of content. We have to cut back the budgets on each piece of content. You're talking about green lights that would happen now for movies that won't get released in theaters until 26.
Okay. So then here's my follow-up question, which is where I was leading to, because I agree with you completely. Where if you're Disney and you know these films are going to agitate and repel more of your family-friendly customer base, which built the Magic Kingdom, which is how they're able to burn all this money, wouldn't it be better to hold these films back, put them in rewrite, or just scrap them? Why release them and do more damage to your brand?
Yeah, I mean, that's right. It seems simple, doesn't it? But at the same time, the problem is that everything up to this point for the Walt Disney Company, with Marvel, with Pixar, well, maybe not so much Pixar, but definitely with Marvel, everything has been reshot to death. Indiana Jones was reshot to death. You're talking about they filmed enough to have 2 movies. Hell, The Rise of Palpatine in 2019, when that came out, they had enough footage for 3 films.
Okay.
They reshot that movie so much. And the reason that's why we heard the smallest actual figure that we heard for the final spend on Rise of Palpatine, just for production, George, after all the reshoots and the screw-ups, $500 million plus. Like $515 million was the smallest figure that we heard.
Incredible.
Yeah, that was before they spent
Indiana
a dime.
Jones Battle of Destiny is like $332 million.
350.
Hold on. So did Rise of Skywalker, Rise of Palpatine, did it lose money then?
Yes.
I thought it did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, big time. Big time. At the theater for sure. Absolutely. Now, 2019 was kind of a funky year because that was when Disney Plus was just getting launched. Disney still had some agreements, but I don't think anything in their 2019 slate, I'd have to go back and look. I don't recall if anything in their 2019 slate had third-party distribution. Like Netflix was paying Disney billions of dollars to get their Marvel slate for years. They canceled that to shore up Disney Plus, which is now collectively $14 billion in the hole since launch.
Yeah. And it's burning.
I know we've got to get to Super Chats, but let me just throw this into the fire real quick.
Go ahead.
George brought this up. It's a perfect point about, when does the market finally say enough is enough? And there's an interesting thing going on here, which is that everything we're seeing come out this year was greenlit and approved by Bob Iger. Mm-hmm. Now, Bob Chapek took over, of course, in 2020, but all of this stuff is Bob Iger stuff. Next year, we'll start to see the stuff that was approved under Chapek, and then that won't last very long because he only had an 8-month tenure. Now, all of that said, this is an Iger problem, and we will, the board has elected to keep Iger on for even longer. So we shouldn't believe that Iger is going to decide he no longer wants to approve Iger kind of things.
No.
So they've tacitly approved what he did. The interesting thing about all of this is you might say, well, how did Iger have such the run that he did for so long? And I think the answer to that is that he was very good at acquiring studios that were doing very well. And then they would do very well for a period of time until the original talent that came in with the studio exited. And then Iger would sort of put in people in place who they could no longer replicate that kind of success. And I'll give you the example here that I think is the most important, perhaps in the downfall of Disney overall. When they removed John Lasseter, the guy who essentially, I mean, that was what they spent when they got Pixar. They were buying John Lasseter. When they exited him out the door for hugging too much, they exited out tremendous genius. And
Right.
he had been placed in charge of so much of the content creation across the company at that point. And when you exit him out, and then Iger puts in his people in place to oversee the creation of the content, they just don't have it. And I don't know how they're going to get it back.
See, I agree with you. You're almost making it sound like Iger did a J.J. Abrams just with studios. He acquired properties that had a built-in name, that had a success, and then slowly destroyed them.
Right, because it's not just the IP. It's the
Right.
genius that made the IP that you're buying.
Correct.
And if you don't know that, he doesn't seem to know it, then you destroy it over time.
See, my point is we all know that they're doing this for an agenda. We know a lot of the companies that are behind them, that have put the people on the boards. Stu and Valiant and I have talked about this before. We've all discussed this on Midnight's Edge. My point was, how long can they continue branding their message, right, without the cash coming in? That's really what I was getting to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Before the shareholders revolt.
Well, I think we're getting there. I want to talk about that in just a few minutes because I think the Nelson Peltz issue is going to come back into play. Pages full of notes here on the earnings report that I printed out. But before we get to that, we have one of our guests that does need to step away. And I'm so glad that she was here tonight. Michelle from Force of Light Entertainment. Final thoughts on all this discussion. And, of course, tell the folks where they can find your wonderful channel with you and your lovely sister, Natalie. Always doing great movie reviews, reaction videos. Ahsoka's starting in about a week or so. I'm sure y'all are going to be covering that. Tell the folks out there about you. And final thoughts on, like I said, on all this.
Yes. Well, first off, thanks for having me. I've enjoyed chatting with you guys about this. It really is just interesting. It really does kind of feel like you're watching the Titanic. I feel they've already hit the iceberg, but they're not even trying to turn. They're just letting it hit the whole ship. I mean, just take it down. But yes, you can find my sister and I at Force of Light Entertainment. And let's see, this week we've got, last week I did my Gran Turismo review. And then this week, Tuesday or Wednesday, we will have our first time watching reaction of Hot Shots 2.
Man.
I love that.
Apparently I'm a Charlie Sheen fan when it comes to comedy. I don't know. The man's quite funny. But yeah, we're going to have that. And then we are about 250 subs away from 20K. So we're hoping.
Right.
Oh, man. Y'all really picked up in the last couple of months then, too, then.
Yes.
That's
We're
awesome.
hoping to get there by the end of the week. But thank you guys so much for having me on. And you guys have an awesome rest of the show.